Hello, and I'm pleased to welcome you here to Main Street Books virtual space. My name is Beth Helfrich, and I'm the events manager here at the bookstore. On behalf of Ada and the rest of the staff, I just want to say thank you for being here for an evening with Pete Davis and Michael Kruse. Before we get started, just a reminder to please stay on mute. You're welcome to keep your video rolling. We're also recording this event. So if you miss something or have to duck out early, that's fine. We'll have it posted on our website in a few days. If you have questions that arise during the conversation, please feel free to put them in the chat. And towards the end of the program, I'll be able to bring those questions forward for Michael and Pete. Before I turn it over to them, I would love to introduce the both of them. So first of all, Michael Kruse. I first heard about Michael Kruse in the fall of 1999, which is a long time ago, during my very short-lived stint as a Davidson College cheerleader. It's safe to say that I spent the first half of my liberal arts tenure in infinite browsing mode myself. Michael had graduated, but he was hanging around the gym, and rumor had it that he was going to be working on a book on Davidson College basketball. He's a big fan. Several years later, he got some pretty good material when Steph and Jason and Bob and the crew made their storied run into the Elite Eight. Michael himself has made a storied run too. He left a journalism role in Florida at the Tampa Bay Times with the American Society of News Editors Distinguished Non-Deadline Writing Award, the Paul Hansel Award for Distinguished Achievement in Florida Journalism, and I believe he also left Florida with his better half. Since returning to Davidson, Michael has been a senior staff writer at Politico and Politico Magazine, focusing on what he calls Trumpology and profiles of presidential candidates and other political notables. He has won the National Press Foundation's Everett McKinley Dirksen Award for Distinguished Reporting of Congress, an honorable mention for the Toner Prize for Excellence in National Political Reporting, and most recently, a National Headliner Award for his work profiling Donald Trump. Prior to joining Politico, his work over time has been anthologized in the Best American Newspaper Narratives, Out There, The Wildest Stories from Outside Magazine, and Next Wave, America's New Generation of Great Literary Journalists. Michael is also a dedicated, see what I did there, Summit coffee drinker next door, and he can often be found out back, sometimes with his lovely wife and 2 daughters in tow, but usually not the dogs and guinea pig. Welcome, Michael. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you, Beth. Very kind intro. I'm just here to ask the questions.
He's a great question asker, which is why we are outsourcing this job for him tonight. And our featured guest tonight is Pete Davis. I don't know Pete as well as I know Michael, but from the moment I read the blurb for Dedicated, I knew I wanted to hear directly from him. A civic advocate, a writer, and I would also argue a historian and philosopher from Falls Church, Virginia, Pete works on projects aimed at deepening American democracy and solidarity, a timely pursuit. He's the co-founder of the Democracy Policy Network, a state policy organization that focus on raising up ideas that enrich democracy. This particular achievement, I have it behind me, Dedicated, grew from his Harvard Law School graduation speech, A Counterculture of Commitment, which went the best kind of viral and has been viewed more than 30 million times. Something about his message resonated with generations and prominent thinkers, and as one who recently moved back to my hometown to fully commit to the place and people I know best, and many of whom are in the room tonight, his message certainly resonated with me. Pete weaves many wise voices together in this book, but one that sticks with me is Wendell Berry, whom Pete quotes as recommending that what you do is the only thing you can do. You take 2 things that ought to be together and you put them back together. 2 things, not all the things. That's the way the work has to go. Well, we thought that Pete Davis and Michael Kruse are 2 things that ought to be together, and we're thrilled to have them here tonight. And now I'll turn it over to them.
So, Pete, this is a really important book and a really good book, a book that everybody should buy if people haven't already. Dedicated, a good, solid title. I might have been tempted, though, to call it The Bucket and the Face Tattoo. And I'm wondering if you can tell the people here who maybe haven't read the book what I might be talking about.
I love that opening. I usually save it for later to talk about the face tattoo, but we'll start with that. So maybe to ease us in, I'll start with the bucket. And first, I just want to say thank you, Beth, so much for having us. And Michael, thank you so much for being the moderator here today. So these are two stories from the book that illustrate the theme of the book, which is this book is a tribute to long haul heroes, the people who work 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years on commitments to causes, communities, places, people, ideas, and stick at them for a long time. And so the bucket is actually a story from Wendell Berry. I'm glad he was brought up. He tells the story of a bucket on his grandfather's farm. And it's a bucket that's hanging on an old rusty nail. And it's been there for 20 years. No one's bothered the bucket. They forgot about it. It's on some fence post somewhere. And over time, feathers fall into the bucket, bugs come into the bucket, birds come in, eat the feathers, leaves fall in and into the bucket. And over time, all of that composts together. And he says a miracle happens inside of that bucket. Earth is made. You know, the stuff of life, the soil out of which life will come is made by that bucket. And he says similarly in a community, the way that culture is made is by having stories and songs and memories and lessons and big mistakes that we can't repeat again, or big wonderful things that we definitely should repeat again, fall through time. And over that time, it's composted together and culture is made, and you have the stuff that makes you love a place. But here's the secret Wendell Berry talks about. The only way that that happens is if there's a bucket there that's stable, that's there for many years. If that bucket was moving all around, if it wasn't nailed to the fence post, you might never have that culture in the first place. And that is one of the main messages of Dedicated, which is that to have anything, all the things that we hold precious, all the communities that we love, all the institutions that we say, darn, this really is working. All the causes where we say, oh my gosh, we were nowhere and now look where we've come. It's because someone decided to be that bucket and stay stable and be committed to something. That's it on a kind of larger level. The face tattoo, I'm glad you brought that up. My favorite interviewee from the book, I interviewed 50 long haul heroes for the book, people who had worked at things for a long time, to ask them about their commitment journeys. And this is ranging from like the most ordinary commitment journey. I just interviewed someone about being a parent. I interviewed someone who had a best friend for a long time. What's it like sticking with your friend? All the way to, I interviewed Ken Burns about making the Vietnam War doc for 10 years, or Evan Wolfson about his 32-year march to advance marriage equality from a law school paper in the 80s to a Supreme Court decision in the 2010s. And one of my favorite people I interviewed was Amy Jones. And she was a tattoo artist in my town. And I was asking her about the craft of tattooing. What's your commitment journey in this craft? And she said, I was dabbling in the craft for a long time. I was hanging out by the tattoo parlor, but I wasn't fully diving in. I wasn't fully committed. I was still thinking, should I be something else? Should I be this? Should I be that? Should I really follow this art that I care about? And I said, well, how did you finally commit? And she said, well, I had to force myself to do it. So I decided to get a face tattoo. I got a tattoo on my neck like this. And she said the day after she got her face tattoo, the reason she got it was, she said, as soon as I get a face tattoo, I have to be a tattoo artist. There's no other job for me that's legal. And she said the day after I got it, I felt better than I've ever felt in my life, because I knew what I had to do now. And right after that, she started getting her license for being a tattoo artist. She's now been it for over 15 years since getting that face tattoo. And she sees it as this deep, purposeful thing that has brought her purpose and community and depth, all because she did that. For the parents that are listening, I am not arguing. This book is aimed at kids and graduates, especially, and I'm not arguing to your kids, get a face tattoo. I'm arguing get a proverbial face tattoo, which is dive in and go all in on something so that you can get the joys and the depth and community and the purpose that comes with going all out on something. So that explains the two images you brought up, Michael. Thanks for starting right in the deep end.
So tell us a little bit about your grandmother and also your parents. In other words, why are you so interested in this? Why are you wired this way?
I say right at the beginning of the book, usually when people write these self-help books, it's usually, I lost 100 pounds and here's how I did it, or I was able to run an ultra marathon and here's how I did it. And in my case, I am not a master committer. I'm not like a long haul hero myself. I'm like every other millennial grappling in infinite browsing mode. But what I am and what made me feel excited and like feel ready to write this book was I am in love with long haul heroes. And that started because I'm from a family of them. I was like born into the world of that. My grandma was the longest, Clara Lou Gubbins was the longest running resident of Riverside, Illinois. She was only away for World War II, where my grandpa had a job in DC with the war effort. My dad was actually, the reason I was so into this topic was my dad was in a cause for both of my parents are real long haul heroes. And my dad was in this cause of indigenous empowerment, indigenous community empowerment for 50 years, basically from the late 60s until he passed away in 2010. And I didn't really understand until I grew up, the details of the substance of the cause. But as I was growing up, I saw the routines of it. I saw what it looked like to advance a cause. It was waking up the same morning, every morning in the same steady way, getting the reading he had to read from the latest thing, marking it up, writing emails to agitate for something, going to some convention or conference somewhere to agitate for something, coming back. And what I noticed was this type of heroism is not cinematic. It's not what I call Hollywood dragon slaying. The real thing that makes change, and my dad was part of a cause that made change. They helped, change the whole anthropology profession from being kind of passive to being active, involved, engaged, and empowering the communities they were studying. The change never has like a big brave moment usually that's definitive. It's not the one big speech that changes everything or the one big fight or the one big march on the streets. It is that steady waking up every day, day in, day out, year in, year out work. And that's what I think probably turned me on to that way of viewing things. And I saw that in my parents and in the stories of my grandparents.
So in the book, you introduce a certain terminology, a culture, a counterculture of commitment versus a culture of open options, infinite browsing versus long haul heroes, and the image of a hallway where we're walking down a hallway or do you settle into a room? And I think one of the things that's challenging for a lot of people, and maybe you can speak to this, is how do you know when to stop walking in the hallway and to pick a room? How do you know which is the right room to step in, open the door, step in, and start the routine, the work of becoming that long haul hero?
Yeah, I give at the beginning of the book, my absolute first chapter after the intro is I want to get, the opening line is I want to give browsing its due. Because I talk about the difference between browsing the hallway, picking a room, browsing the menu screen of life, picking a darn movie and watching it all the way through. And I talk about the pleasures of browsing. So one, and this is really important to share, and it's kind of what we have to know before we kind of click out of browsing and pick a room and settle in. One is it's really good for flexibility. It's good to kind of not have everything be so intense, not have everything be so, if I go on this date, that means we're married. If I go to this one job, that means that's my career forever. You need things to be, in the words of people my age, chill, to be able to explore. The second is the novelty of browsing is really fun. And, it's fun to see a bunch of new things and try a bunch of new things out, visit new things, meet new people, things like that. And the deepest, most significant part of browsing is a path towards finding your authentic self. I talk, this is a book about In Praise of Commitment, but I talk about in the book, one of the most important moments in most young people's lives, and even people who have these experiences later, is when you throw off the involuntary commitments that you inherited that don't feel authentic to you, whether that's changing religions or breaking up with your high school sweetheart that wasn't right for you at all, or coming out, all these different things that are about finding your authentic self by getting rid of inherited commitments. But what I talk about in the book is that eventually, if you do too much flexibility or novelty, or try to find your perfect, totally static, totally detailed, authentic self, eventually all of these pleasures are haunted by pains. And so flexibility is eventually haunted by choice paralysis. So you jump from thing to thing, and then suddenly you have a hard time, you get less and less satisfaction out of anything you choose because you've jumped from thing to thing. And I actually go into the psychology of this. There's wonderful studies from Barry Schwartz, who wrote this great book, The Paradox of Choice, which says the more options you have, the less satisfied you are with any given option. The example he famously gives is, you're given 31 flavors in one part of the experiment. You're given chocolate or vanilla in another. You end up actually liking the chocolate or vanilla more because you only are thinking about, oh, this chocolate is better than the vanilla if I chose the chocolate. Whereas if you go to 31 flavors and you try it out a bit, you're like, oh gosh, I should have picked, raspberry. I should have picked Rocky Road. I should have picked this. You're haunted by your unchosen options. The novelty is eventually haunted by shallowness. You jump from thing to thing. You think there's all these cool new things, but suddenly you're craving something much deeper. You're craving being 5 years into something. You're craving a long-term relationship that feels comfortable, not the snazziest new person that walks in the door. And most significantly, this search for perfect authenticity eventually can be haunted by what the sociologist Emile Durkheim called anomie, the feeling of spiritual isolation, the feeling that not only that you're lost, but that you have nothing to orient you at all. It's not that you're just losing the ball game. It's that there's no scoreboard. It's not that you're just lost on the journey. It's that there's no destination that seems worthy to you. That's what it's haunted by. And so what I say in the book is, be on the lookout for when the pains start haunting the pleasures too much. And that's probably the time to start committing. And you should maybe start thinking about that even still when browsing is fun, because, you could be haunted for the rest of your life by those pains because of the fears you have of commitment, and deny yourself the purpose and community and depth and impact and joy that comes from a long haul. So that's when you kind of know it's time to browsing. The browsing is curdling into pain, and so let's start making a commitment.
So in my reading, I found myself wondering. You describe, even in the subhead, this age of infinite browsing, but have there not always been infinite browsers and also long haul committers? And is there something different about now that makes people who would have been predisposed to be an infinite browser in any age worse off now than in previous generations?
Yeah, I didn't want to do what they call a potted history, where you kind of a non-historian comes in and says, now is the most superlative time, and no time is like this. Because I do think, every person grapples, throughout all times, all places. I talk about, my friends who are in state prison who also grapple with infinite browsing inside of a place where so much is chosen for them. They're like, they write to me and they say, should I go to this worship service or that? Should I spend my time this way or that way? Everyone grapples with this, and across all times. But I do talk a bit about what might be happening in our time that might make this come to an extreme level. So one is we just cannot overemphasize the explosion of options that happened during the 20th century. You start with technology. You know, for many people, the fastest you could move, the fastest you saw anything move before the 20th century, you know, in America, we had trains towards the late end, so maybe 150 years ago, but the fastest you could see anything move was a galloping horse. To go a few towns over was a day trip. And you come across the century and, you know, it's very accessible to go on an around the world trip for most people at some point in your life. You know, the technology of just information, that's you going somewhere else, other places coming to you, you know, from, you know, I had an original draft of the book, the experience of like hearing radio for the first time or movies for the first time, and let alone TV and the internet for the first time. All these possible ways of life telling you ways you could be, things you could go, people you could be with, areas you could be at. And this is taken to the absolute extreme with the internet. You can swipe through every possible person you could date in town. You can see every possible career path, every possible subculture with added materials to help you join the subculture. On a justice level, and this is a good thing, you know, there's been an unhooking of a bunch of involuntary commitments through the racial, gender, and queer justice struggles over the last century that has unleashed a bunch of people to, you know, have a lot more options, which is a great thing, but comes with a lot more options. And let alone outside of those specific justice struggles, just the, you know, explosion of culture and subculture where, you know, you can, you know, I quote the Cat Stevens song, there's a million things to be, you can be what you want, you know, you can wear your hair long, wear it short, be this, believe that. That's all open to you. And then finally, you know, there's been a waning of what could be called attachment entities. You know, Robert Putnam writes about this in Bowling Alone, the decline of churches and synagogues and other religious communities of faith, the decline of civic organizations that orient you to purpose, the decline of professional organizations, the decline of, you know, people just believing in these large stories that orient you to meaning and purpose in your life, have been, you know, deconstructed, delegitimized, corrupted, both from the outside and from the inside. So all of this is adding up to being, you know, someone put it, you are the curator of your own constellation of meaning. Whereas if very likely if you were born in 1800, there would be a constellation assigned to you. And now you're the curator of your own meaning. Many aspects of this, very, very good, but it does come with a challenge where after you're liberated, after you're free, what then do you dedicate yourself to? What do you choose to become part of so you aren't just floating isolated without any meaning or purpose?
So we've mentioned Wendell Berry a couple times already, and there's another way in which you cite him in this book. He said there are two types of people in this world, boomers and stickers. And the boomers are mobile, moving from place to place to seize opportunities. Stickers are, quote, those who settle and love the life they have made and the place they have made it in. And I found myself thinking, is there a third type of person, the most common type of person, who's a little bit of both? You have to be a boomer when necessary, and you have to be a sticker when you can, when you find yourself in a position to stick. And you know, this might be self-centered, but I thought about my own path at this point. I mean, I couldn't be even thinking about trying to be a sticker where I am if I hadn't been a boomer for a while. I mean, I'm 43, I'm 21 years into my career, and I'm in a place where it's like, well, I could be here for a while, but it took some time being a boomer. So how do we sort that out in an increasingly complicated world where often it's not, even if you are incredibly privileged and incredibly lucky, it's often not your choice if you get to be a sticker. Sometimes you have to be a boomer.
Yes, and you know, I have a few thoughts on that. One is part of the goal of this book was to put a hand on the scale of a scale that I think has gotten out of whack, not to say that only one way is right. The book is an attempt at rebalancing, where I feel like most of the cultural messages you're getting are, build your resume, and the messages I got a lot when I was growing up, build your resume, take this job because it'll help you keep your options open for the next job. Don't get tied down, always seek opportunity. Don't speak too much about what you believe in online, because that might close off options later. And so there's a lot of cultural messages about that. And part of my goal, or, the person who, a lot of localists write about, the person who stayed in their hometown is considered a special thing or a lamentable thing, whereas a person who went very far away from their hometown is considered to have gone far. Think the localist writer Bill Kaufman talks about this. Think about built into our language how much we celebrate booming. Oh, they made it. They went to the big city. They went to New York, and they're doing big things. Whereas the person who, there's a famous Onion headline where it's like, pathetic person from high school, stays home and is happily involved in community and has lovely family and, is beloved by 300 people in their hometown or something. And it's a joke on the fact that the mass cultural message is often the opposite, even though this is bringing a lot of joy and impact to be a sticker. The other message I wanted to say, so I wanted a rebalancing without being dogmatic about it. The other message I wanted to say is I started as a localist. I come from this community of localists on, it's an intellectual community of people who write about, getting rooted in a place. And a lot of times it's, you think associated with Wendell Berry, and it's like small farm towns, little small towns across the country. But there's also wonderful people like Dorothy Day and others who write about, localism of a Bronx neighborhood or something like that. But part of my goal actually was to expand the essence of localism, the commitment to place, to more categories, because people have different callings in life, and some people aren't called to have their commitment journey be about commitment to a place. So I do talk about patriots that's my phrase for kind of local patriots, people who love a place, in the book. But I also talk about other ways you could be committed. So one of the groups I talk about is citizens, people who are committed to causes. And people who are committed to causes might have to fly all around the world and not be as committed to a local place. I talked about builders, people who are committed to ideas. Stewards, very important. The people who keep things going, not the people who come up with something new, but the people who steward institutions, the people who maintain things. Artisans, people who are committed to crafts, and most importantly, companions, people who are committed to people. And I chose companion because it's such a beautiful word. It means com, meaning with, and pan, meaning bread, which is, roughly translated, the word means those who eat bread with another. All you can be for someone else. You can't change them, you can't control them. You can just be present with them. And that's what I've seen in people who are committed to people. So I wanted to say, with your story, Michael, maybe you've only been able to recently move to this place you want to move. Your commitment to craft, your artisanship, is something that's also celebrated in this book, and the joy of kind of being 21 years, even if it's had to make you not be as rooted in a place. The spirit of being rooted is also happening in your rootedness to the larger community of journalism. So, but I don't want to speak for you. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, that's correct. So, so there's another wave in this book, an avenue in this book that is cultural criticism. We spoke a little bit about this earlier today on the phone. Let me just read quickly, because I also see the clock here. From the book on page 226, society is held together by a web of trust between the public and the institutions that serve them. But where the culture of open options has taken hold, corruption abounds, and this web of trust unravels. Jumping over to the next page, 227, the figures that best exploit the corruption, who profit on the gap between the lingering public trust in an institution and what the institution lets you get away with, start gaining power. And so this is my way of transitioning from what we've been talking about to politics, but really not politics, democracy. So let's talk about sort of, not to be too highfalutin here, but the state of democracy in this country based on what this book is about. 229. One way we do so is through nostalgia and these leaders that you just referenced. So other forms of nostalgia are more consequential. Politicians who run on reviving some idealized form of the past. Who could you be talking about here? But nostalgia isn't sustainable. Every time you run the reel again, the picture degrades and the magic fades. So I just returned from Ohio, where I spent Saturday in a packed room, 500, 600 Republican grassroots activist sorts. And it's an 8-hour run of show. And literally the first hour was a replay of a 2019 speech in which Donald Trump announced his 2020 campaign. And I couldn't help but think of this part of your book. So let's just throw out a broad-based question for you. What is the state of democracy right now in this country, and how do we fix it, Pete?
What's funny about this question is, this book seems on the surface like it's this simple kind of self-help book about helping nudge young people, a finger wagging thing at young people to tell them, commit to something. But the real reason I wrote this is a much deeper issue. What I work on in my daily life is I really care deeply about the future of democracy. I care deeply about justice causes. I care deeply about civic revival in our country, getting more people involved in our communities and public life. And when I first gave the speech that inspired this book, when I was first given the opportunity to give this, I had all these substantive things I wanted to talk about. I could talk about Trump. I could talk about criminal legal reform. I could talk about global warming, all these substantive causes we care about, getting people more involved in their communities, the isolation crisis, racial justice, all this stuff. But when I thought about it, I thought, I tried to go deeper, and I tried to think what's called like the Archimedean lever. What is the one message that is at the core, that I believe is one of the things that's at the core of blocking us from advancing all these important causes? Repairing all these breaches, rectifying these injustices. And the thing that hit me, and especially from interviewing these long haul heroes in the book, is that we simply did not have enough people committed to tackling these challenges and committed at the level that needs to be done, because things happen slow, not fast. We didn't have enough people willing to commit to the 1, 5, 10, 15, 20-year walks that are taken to achieve any of these things. We were looking for quick fixes, and what we needed was long haul heroes. And so I wrote this book because, there is nobody but us to solve these problems, and there's nobody of us to tackle these challenges. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we have a more dedicated people. And there's a really hopeful story there, which is that when you talk to long haul heroes who've really achieved things, who've revived a corrupt institution, who've knocked out a bully in an election, who's advanced a justice cause over decades, they are improvists. They work on it one way for 5 years, then they learn something and work on it another way. Then that strategy doesn't work anymore, and then they try something new. Then an opportunity arises and they seize it. There's no real one silver bullet strategy or tactic that's going to heal our problems in our country. The only thing that they all had in common was they themselves were dedicated to sticking at these problems for a long time. They were dedicated to continuing the walk and not let uncertainty and distraction and boredom, often of the boredom of 1,000 meetings, get in their way. I have a part in the book, and this will get to, the hopeful story of the book soon, but I have this part in this book on Martin Luther King. We talk about the big, brave moments of Martin Luther King, one of the last great, successive civic revival moments in our country. We talk about the big, brave moments, the I Have a Dream speech, the Montgomery bus boycott, standing in front of the fire hoses. But I read a bunch of his memoirs and notes about his journey in prepping for this book. And it was a lot of meetings. It was, he talks at the beginning of his memoir on the Montgomery bus boycott, Stride Toward Freedom. He says, he comes to be the pastor of the local church in Montgomery, Alabama. And then he starts doing weddings and funerals and getting to know everyone in his church. Then he forms a bunch of meetings. Then they form a social action committee and he gets that going. Then he works with them late at night to print the newsletter in the right format. Think about this. Martin Luther King, big epic person with a monument. His work started with, we got to get the formatting of the newsletter right, of the church newsletter. Then he's like, we got to weave the churches together. So he goes to a thing called the Citizens Coordinating Committee. Then he joins the local NAACP. By the way, in the local NAACP, who has been secretary for 10 years? Rosa Parks. She wasn't a random person who sat down and the world stood up. She had been a long haul hero for 10 years. Then the Pipe Fitters Union comes along and they'd been building up solidarity as the Pipe Fitters Union and they gave him office space. Then the Women's Council had 44 leaders come together and be the Montgomery Women's Council. And they had been going for 8 years and they all came together so that by the time that spark happened with Rosa Parks, there was already decades of gathering of tinder that allowed them to sustain a year-long bus boycott and take that to the next level when it became a whole movement throughout the South. What we need to do in this desert of our time now, where it looks really dark in democracy, where it looks like there's a lot of isolation, a lot of corruption, a lot of problems, is we need to not hope for the big brave moment right now. We need to start gathering tinder. We need to do the spade work. We need to prepare the soil for action and start, or for those of you in the audience who are already along the long haul, continue those long hauls. That's the only way it's going to work. It's not going to be something in the next year, but it's also not going to be something that never happens. It can only happen in this kind of 5, 10, 15, 20-year time scale. That's the message of the book.
This might seem like a strange question, but is there that pro-democracy long haul heroes or aspiring long haul heroes can learn from the last half a decade plus from the MAGA movement? Have they done something?
Yes. So, I'll reveal in the spirit of the book, which says, speak out and reveal your true commitments to people. Don't hide it to please people. I'm a progressive and I'm from the left side of the spectrum. And I actually think there's a lot you can learn from the other side, what I sometimes call the anti-democracy movement in this country. One great example of this is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan appears out of nowhere and has this right-wing revolution in this country. And it seems to happen so fast and it's so successful that even people on the other side are living in the language of his side. You get a Democratic president by the mid-90s saying the era of big government is over. That didn't start in 1980, as many people listening might know. It started with the glimmer in a think tanker's eye at the Heritage Foundation in the 60s. It started with Barry Goldwater, running and preparing the soil. It started with Reagan running in 1976 to prepare the soil even more. It started with, people writing all the policies that he eventually implemented. And you can see the same thing happening on the other side today. For people on my side of the spectrum, what you're seeing with the Biden White House is coming out with all these, for people on my side of the spectrum, inspiring things that are happening. And you say, the student debt, where's that coming from? Well, there's a group called Strike Debt that has been working since 2011 to talk about student debt. Where's this stuff about there's a bunch of money and regulations about domestic workers, home health care aides that are in the rescue plan. That's because folks like iGenPoo and the National Domestic Workers Alliance started a project 10 years ago to start agitating for that. Why is there talks about a Green New Deal? It's because people 10 years ago started talking about a Green New Deal. Why was there a big move to the progressive end? It's because people like, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have been beating the drum for many decades before it ever broke through. And so everything you see in the news today is because someone did a long haul project 15 years ago. You know, we have the cicadas coming to my neck of the woods. Do they make it down to North Carolina too?
I haven't seen one. Have you seen
Okay,
one?
well, you're very lucky. I'm a bug phobe. So we have the cicadas coming out now. They come every 17 years. And it's been funny having them come out while my book's been coming out, because one of my messages is probably many of the things happening today are because someone was working on something the last cicadas. And if you want something to happen by the next cicadas, you got to start working on it during this cicadas. So 17 years is a pretty good cycle for the message of my book.
So who's the bigger long haul hero, Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden?
It's funny. They're two perfect examples of the message of my book. So take these two examples. You got Bernie Sanders running in the 70s for like governor of Vermont on the Liberty Union ticket and getting 1% of the vote, and then handing out film strips of Eugene V. Debs door to door while kind of living in a one-room rental in Vermont. He slowly works his way to win a miraculous mayor's race, then re-enter the Senate, and then run for president, then run for president again. That's one way, the kind of outsider strategy becoming the insider. Then you got Joe Biden, this other story where you say, oh, it's amazing he's president. Maybe he was always destined to be president. But that presidency, talk about a story of long haul relationship building, the total consummate insider story. That presidency is built on day in, day out handshakes in parking lots in Dover, in random outside of random stores in Dover, Delaware, and remembering the name of the comptroller of Wilmington or something. And then out of that comes, eventually becoming president in your late 70s. It's another story of how things don't happen fast. They happen slow and then suddenly all at once.
So before we shift to questions, and just to I guess, set a theme for the questions, perhaps. You tell a story toward the end of the book about, or mention a short story called The Man Who Planted Trees. And so I'm wondering if, to kick off sort of question and answer session, you can talk about how all of us can do our part, sort of putting those seeds, putting those acorns into the ground where we live, and to plant those trees.
Yeah, this is part of the message. I actually I'll read a poem that captures the spirit of the spirit of that story, which is a Wendell Berry poem, and the story is basically the similar message, which is, and this is the poem kind of at the heart of the whole book, the kind of political message of the book. In the dark of the moon, in flying snow, in the dead of winter, war spreading, families dying, the world in danger, I walk the rocky hillside sowing clover. And I just thought, and that's similar to the other story I talk about, which is about a place where a guy reaches this town and it's a total desert. Everyone's angry, everyone's sad. And he just starts planting acorns in a row. And suddenly trees start coming, the birds come back, the flowers come back, the picnics come back, the laughter comes back. For many people, there's a lot of books out there talking about how it's so dark. And I love those books. It's very important to be real about what's happening. It's very important to tear down unjust systems and look clear-eyed at corruption. But we also need books and messages out there that show a way forward. We often feel there's a desert that we live in. We look around and our professions are corrupt, our institutions are corrupt, communities in decline, politics is a mess. But the only way out is by making commitments to things and deciding to plant things again. It's to finding those cracks in the desert and planting an acorn. It's finding a place on the rocky hillside where you can plant clover, whether it's Karen Washington planting a literal garden, community garden across from her Bronx townhouse, or Pierce Freelon running for city council in Durham, North Carolina on a Afrofuturist agenda, or Kimberly Wasserman saying, I'm not going to stand up. I'm not going to have a coal power plant in my neighborhood anymore. Or my friend down the road, Liz Fenwick, having a kid and deciding to love her kid, even though the future looks bleak. Or old friends deciding to sustain a friendship. Or Gabrielle Grajeda, who I interviewed, who's keeping her Bolivian dance troupe going and saying it's important we pass this culture on to the young Bolivian kids in our neighborhood. Or Dave Eckert and Annette Mills in my hometown, who said, who made documentaries about little streams in our town and other natural phenomenon to get to play in the elementary school to get kids more excited about the natural world around us. A tiny patch of life in a desert is not a small thing, it is everything. And it all starts with a commitment to a long haul. And that's my message of the book. I'm so excited to hear your questions. And Michael, thank you so much for your questions.
Beth, is this where you take over and open it to questions, or
It depends on whether how comfortable you are, multitasking, by which I just mean looking at the chat and raising those questions to Pete.
does anybody have questions? I see Beth has entered something into the chat, but nobody else.
I know. I'm hoping there are some questions out there.
I don't have a question, but I just want to applaud Pete's enthusiasm. It's just contagious.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Allison. I appreciate it. I really believe this book I poured my heart into. This is near and dear to me. Someone once asked me, what are the two feelings that you want people to walk away? Give me two feelings you want people to walk away with this book with. And enthusiasm is part of each of them, which is, one is gratitude, which is gratitude for the long haul heroes that made all the precious things we hold dear in our life. The people who worked at things for a long time to, keep places and causes and projects and communities going. And then the other was encouragement, which is, people knowing that they, if you're on the edge right now, listening, one of the people listening to this right now, the message of the book, and you're on the edge, you're like, should I commit to that? Should I go all in on that? Should I double down on that relationship? Should I double down on that cause or this community, or joining up with something, or starting that thing I always wanted to start, or keeping going on that thing I feel called to keep going on? This is a little bit of a nudge to encourage you to do it. This is the moment. Come out of this book talk and double down on that commitment. So that's one of the hopes. So hope the enthusiasm helps with that.
When did you need the nudge, Pete, with this book project or any other projects?
I had a moment where I was really lost, actually. I ended up going to law school. The speech that inspired this book was a graduation speech from law school, but I'm very unlawyerly. I'm not precise. I'm not good at arguing. I'm not good at being right. I'm not good at paperwork. I'm a very bad lawyer, and I probably shouldn't have gone to law school. But right as I had decided to go, because I had gotten encouraged from mentors and things like that, and I was feeling like lost. Oh, should I even go or should I not? What am I doing? And I had this moment where I was like, oh, am I just doing this out of static, inertia or something? And I made a decision there where I said, I'm going to go, but I'm going to return to my hometown after I'm done. And I'm going to decide right here and now that in 3 years, when this is over, I'm going to go to my hometown and I'm going to double down on being rooted there. And that decision gave me like a sense of serenity and a sense of purpose that got me through the confusions of like kind of stumbling into this profession that I didn't know if I was right for. I found a type of rootedness that when I was feeling kind of unrooted in other things, that gave me rootedness. The other big thing is, people have asked me, oh, have you made any commitments because of writing the book? And one thing that I'm very proud of is I got married while writing this book to my lovely wife, Lark, and she helped edit the book. And she cut like tens of thousands of words from a very bloated first draft. And I am very proud that I made the ultimate commitment while writing a book about commitment. So that was a happy commitment I made while doing this.
She's the real long haul hero.
Yes.
Pete, that actually ties into a question that we have sort of from the audience, which is, how do we create long haul energy outside of our professions? So the audience member says, I often feel like work takes so much of my energy, but this can't be the only long haul dedication of my life. So what insight do you have about how to have more than one long haul commitment?
Yeah, this is a hard thing because we have to balance different long haul commitments. I've had people talk to me about, oh, you're talking about all these cause fighters, but I have young kids, so this is very privileged. I have other people saying, oh, I have work and that's getting in the way of other things. And one of my messages is all of these commitments are worthwhile, and you're just as much of a long haul hero by being a companion to one person as you are to changing the world in some big way. And so, but on the specific question of how do we find commitments outside of work, the first thing I'll just say as a word of encouragement is all the magic happens in politics and civic life outside of most of the magic happens outside of our direct day job. We need to have some political change that gives us more time outside of work to tend to the things that we hold in common. That's what civic life is. This book's not just about civics, but it has a lot of civics in there. And most of civic life, there's some parts in the workplace like unionizing and co-ops and professions and people being honorable in their work. But a lot of the work is outside of that, and we need to find space for that. My favorite thing I've had, my favorite two messages I got about this from Long Haul Heroes. I'll start with one, which is from Gracie Olmstead. And I interviewed her about what do you do when you feel like the people around you aren't going to be committed and you're going to be a chump by being the committed one in a place of uncommitted, selfish people or something. And she said this beautiful thing where she said, commitment, if you're vocal about it, is contagious, and you bring out the qualities that you want in other people by being the asker and being the first mover. She said, if you want a more neighborly neighborhood, be neighborly, be the one who knocks on the door of the grumpy neighbor and says, hi, I just wanted to introduce myself. And that you might be surprised that you will be pleasantly surprised more often than not by how it brings out that quality and awakens that quality in other people. So many of my long haul heroes were people who were asked to do what they were doing. Someone somewhere asked them. Karen Washington, my final long haul hero that I conclude the book with, I wanted her because she was asked by her neighbor, would you help with this community garden I'm trying to build? And then she got so involved, she became the big community garden, queen of New York. And it was because someone asked her. And Gracie says, bring out it in others by being the first mover. And so I would really encourage people to bring other people along. My favorite long haul hero from my neighborhood when I was growing up, Annette Mills, she said, every time I did a civic project, I made sure to design it with a relational element. And we tried to make it fun and make it something that built community, even as we were achieving a task together. If it wasn't building community, it wasn't going to be sustainable because it's not going to be fun unless you're getting to know people and having fun together. So do what you need to do. That's why Martin Luther King had the songs. That's why they had pep rallies at the churches. That's why union drives have buttons and T-shirts. That's why we need to have the relational element. So bring other people along, and do the small steps first, and it'll take on a life of its own. That's what I heard from a lot of people too. So dip in and see the smallest possible thing you can do, and dive into that, and then watch it grow. All easier said than done, though. So
I see one more. Dean, I think, did that answer your question? He was asking sort of how do you move fence sitters on the things that matter to you, but I think you sort of just spoke to that about leading with your own enthusiasm, and then making the direct ask, bringing folks along with you. I think we have time probably for one more question. And Shaw is asking if you had, maybe a favorite or funniest story. I would add to that too. I'm sure people are coming to you now that the book is out with lots and lots of their own stories about their own long haul heroes in their lives. Is there a favorite story that didn't make it into the book that you'd like to share with us?
There are just so many, and I'd love, please send me your long haul hero stories. We're thinking of even creating an Instagram account to feature long haul heroes. And my one quick thing I'll say is, if there's a project you want to take on in the spirit of dedication, start a local Hall of Fame. This is my big goofy proposal in civics, which is start a local Hall of Fame to honor the long haul heroes of your school or your institution or your profession or your town, and get their stories told to young people and everyone in your town, because that's the way that we're going to promote this. My favorite, my most fun story is I just love talking to this guy, Mickey Raphael. Mickey Raphael is Willie Nelson's harmonica player. And I specifically sought out, I said, I wanted to prove a point with this interview, which was, I went out and I said, I want to find someone committed to the goofiest, smallest thing, because I wanted to show how powerful commitment itself was. That commitment didn't need to be to the grandest cause, like I'm fighting climate change or something. That any type of commitment to anything, no matter how small, has a magical quality to it. And so I interviewed a bunch of people. Like I interviewed someone committed to bonsai trees. I interviewed, all these different, someone who just worked on one tiny plot of land. And my favorite was, I was like, what's the goofy instrument? The harmonica. With all respect to harmonica players, it's an amazing instrument, but it's not the grand piano or something. And I said, okay, let's talk to Mickey Raphael. He was a kid in high school. He was a little lost. He was a little isolated. He goes to a bar in Dallas, Texas called the Rubaiyat Club. And he sees this guy, Donnie Brooks, playing the harmonica. It lights a fire in his heart. And he goes up to Donnie Brooks and he says, I wanna learn more. Donnie Brooks shows him 5 minutes of blues riffs on the harmonica. He goes home, he gets himself a Marine Band harmonica. He starts playing it. It's easy to sound like okay on the harmonica. He admits to that. He says, most people, you're always in tune. But then he learns all the art of it. He devotes his whole life to it. He brings it everywhere. He walks around the track at high school playing it. He becomes known around town as this amazing harmonica kid and gets associated with the recording studio in town. And then Willie Nelson comes to the recording studio. He needs a harmonica riff on it. And he sits in, Mickey Raphael. Willie says, that's great. Why don't you come join the band? Mickey Raphael ends up touring the world. He's been doing it for 50 years. He says he has 2 commitments in life, the harmonica and Willie Nelson. He played for the president at the White House, and his whole life opened up because he committed to the harmonica. So that is one of my favorite stories, because it's just, the magic of when you go deep on something. It might feel at first like you're closing doors, but you are definitely opening them. And that's one of the messages of this. By get committed to anything, and it'll take you to more exciting things and more impactful things and more joyful things than you could ever imagine.
Thank you so much. We're right at 8 o'clock. And so I have to let you all go, although I could sit and listen to Michael and Pete talk for a lot longer. I want to say thank you to audience members for showing up, even when we're all zoomed out. It means so much that you continue to show up and support Main Street Books and our events. And I want to say a huge thank you to Michael Kruse for being with us tonight. I definitely just made the ask, and I'm so thankful that you said yes, because you dove deep, as I knew you would, and asked really insightful and helpful questions. So thank you so much for being here, Michael.
Thank you for asking me.
I hope you'll do it again sometime. And finally, Pete, thank you so much for joining us from Virginia. I hope that we get to host you someday in the store. Who knows what your next deep dive will be, but we are so grateful that you committed your time and effort to this particular topic, and we're so glad that you could be here with us tonight.
And thank you so much, Main Street Books. From everything I've heard, is a great example of a long haul institution being that bucket that's creating culture locally and keeping this community of readers together. Thank you so much.
We'll try to be a bucket. Good night, everyone. Thanks so much for being here.